This is a family neighborhood, not some carnival.
That's what Karen, my self-appointed neighborhood watch commander, hissed while I was grilling burgers at 3 p.m. on a perfectly legal Saturday barbecue. She stood right there on my property line, arms crossed, staring at my Puerto Rican wife like we were somehow contaminating her precious suburb. 30 minutes later, police sirens. 2 embarrassed officers trudging up my driveway because someone reported our loud disturbance, aka kids laughing and music barely audible beyond our fence. My twins went silent. My wife's face burned with shame as neighbors gawked from their porches. The smell of charcoal mixed with pure injustice. But as Karen stood there smirking at the chaos she'd created, I knew something she didn't. Something that was about to turn her perfect little world upside down. What would you do if your neighbor weaponized police against your family barbecue? Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. Let me back up and tell you who we are. I'm Roman Donnelly, 15-year FBI veteran who moved my family to Clearwater Heights because we wanted normal. My wife Elena, pediatric nurse, Puerto Rican sunshine in human form, works night shifts saving kids' lives. Our twins Sophia and Miguel just turned 8 and think daddy's coolest because he gets to carry a badge. We'd been here 6 months living quietly in our modest 2-story house. The neighborhood smelled like fresh asphalt and new beginnings, with Elena's garden adding notes of cilantro and basil to the suburban air. Kids' bikes cluttered driveways, ice cream trucks played their tinny melodies, and people actually waved when they passed. Then we met Delilah Hutchinson. Picture this. Blonde bob sharp enough to cut glass, real estate agent smile that never reaches her eyes, HOA board member who treats community rules like biblical commandments, corner house bristling with ring cameras aimed at everyone else's property, lawn so unnaturally perfect it looked like green carpet samples. Her husband Bryce, quiet guy in rumpled government suits, always rushing off to some federal job with a parking pass stuck to his Honda's windshield. The barbecue confrontation was bad enough, but what happened next showed Delilah's true colors. 30 minutes after her carnival comment, I heard the distinctive whoop of police sirens cutting through our peaceful Saturday afternoon. The sound made my stomach drop, not because I was worried, but because I knew exactly what was happening. 2 patrol cars pulled up, their red and blue lights painting our house like a crime scene. Officer Martinez and his partner climbed out, looking embarrassed as hell. The crunch of their boots on our gravel driveway echoed through the suddenly silent neighborhood. "Sorry to bother you folks," Martinez said, his voice carrying across yards where neighbors had emerged to gawk. "We got a noise complaint about excessive volume?" Sophia and Miguel stopped mid-splash in their kiddie pool, water dripping from their confused faces. Elena's friends from the hospital, still holding paper plates of food, stared in shock. The humiliation hit my wife like a physical blow, her cheeks flushing deep red as she realized our barbecue had become a public spectacle. I discreetly showed Martinez my badge. His expression shifted from professional concern to barely concealed irritation. "Federal agent, huh?" he muttered, glancing toward Delilah's house where she stood in her doorway, arms crossed, watching our family's dignity get shredded in front of the entire neighborhood. "Look, we have to respond to all calls, but this is clearly a waste of your time," I finished. "I understand you're just doing your job." The sound of car doors slamming as they left felt like gunshots in the thick afternoon air. My kids stood dripping and silent, not understanding why police had come to their party. Elena's hands trembled as she tried to salvage what was left of our celebration. But the real punch came Monday morning. Elena pulled a certified letter from our mailbox, the thick envelope crackling like thunder in the morning quiet. Inside, notice of violation in bold red letters. Grass height exceeds community standards. Children's equipment improperly stored. Excessive noise complaints from multiple neighbors. $200 fine plus $25 daily until compliance achieved. I measured everything with crime scene precision. Grass, 2.1 inches, limit 2.5. Basketball hoop, regulation distance. Sophia's bike, properly stored. Every violation was pure fiction. HOA violations require documented evidence and proper notification procedures. Fines issued without photographic proof and following improper protocols are legally invalid and can be successfully challenged in court. Through our kitchen window, Delilah raised her coffee mug in a mock toast, watching us scramble with measuring tapes. The satisfaction on her face was unmistakable. The smell of Elena's stress cooking filled our kitchen. garlic and sofrito sizzling while she processed the injustice. Our kids played outside, oblivious to the war brewing around them. I opened my laptop and started researching. If Delilah wanted to weaponize bureaucracy against my family, she was about to discover what happens when you target a federal investigator's children. 3 days later, the harassment campaign officially launched. I was reviewing case files in my home office when Elena burst through the door, waving another certified letter like evidence of war crimes. The thick envelope crackled ominously in her trembling hands. "Marcus, you need to see this." The second HOA notice was a masterpiece of bureaucratic terrorism. Delilah had apparently conducted a follow-up inspection of our property and discovered new violations that would make a tax auditor weep with envy. Unauthorized window decorations visible from street, Sophia's hand-drawn Father's Day card, complete with crayon hearts and "Best Daddy Ever," taped to our kitchen window, was apparently destroying neighborhood aesthetics. Recreational vehicle parked in violation of setback requirements. My kids' scooters, folded and leaning against our garage wall, were now classified as motorized vehicles requiring special permits. The kicker that made my blood pressure spike? Improper display of foreign cultural symbols. Elena's small Puerto Rican flag hanging proudly next to our American flag was suddenly a community threat requiring immediate removal. Daily penalty, $50 per violation. Total potential fine, $350 every single day until we stripped away every trace of our identity. The smell of vindictiveness practically oozed from the official letterhead like cheap perfume. This wasn't about property maintenance, this was systematic harassment wearing a legal costume, and I'd seen enough civil rights cases during my FBI career to recognize the pattern. "She's targeting us specifically," Elena said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and rage. "The Johnsons have their RV parked directly on the street for 3 months. The Martinez family has a Mexican flag twice the size of mine. Mrs. Park has Korean wind chimes that actually make noise at 6 a.m. I grabbed my camera and conducted a neighborhood reconnaissance mission. Elena was absolutely right. Delilah's violations were applied with the surgical precision of a sniper, hitting families who didn't match her vision of suburban perfection, while identical infractions at white-owned properties remained mysteriously invisible. Years of investigating housing discrimination cases had taught me that selective enforcement often violates Fair Housing Act protections, especially when targeting specific ethnic groups. This could escalate beyond neighborhood drama into federal civil rights territory, which gave me some interesting options. The next evening, I attended my first Clearwater Heights HOA meeting in the community center's depressing conference room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects while the air hung thick with burnt coffee and resignation. 15 residents scattered across metal folding chairs, most looking like they'd rather be getting root canals. Delilah sat at the head table like a discount dictator, manila folder thick with violations spread before her like battle plans. When she spotted me entering, her smile sharpened into something predatory and hungry. "Oh, wonderful," she announced to the room with fake sweetness dripping from every word. "Our newest resident is here to discuss his family's ongoing compliance issues." That's when I sprung my mini twist. "Actually," I said, standing with the calm authority that comes from 15 years of federal investigations, "I'm here to discuss procedural violations and HOA enforcement protocols." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as I opened my own folder. 3 days of research into every HOA bylaw, county regulation, and state statute governing community associations. What I'd discovered was a pattern of illegal procedures that would make any compliance officer break into cold sweats. According to your own bylaws, violation notices require photographic documentation taken within 72 hours of alleged infractions. None of my notices include required photo evidence, timestamps, or proper signature authentication. Delilah's confident expression flickered like a broken neon sign. "We don't need to provide every little..." Section 4.2 of your governing documents disagrees. Additionally, all monetary penalties must be approved by majority board vote in properly noticed meetings following state corporation law. When exactly was the vote authorizing these fines against my property? The sound of nervous paper rustling filled the awkward silence as other board members suddenly became fascinated with their meeting agendas. Delilah's face was turning an interesting shade of crimson that clashed spectacularly with her bottle blonde highlights. But I wasn't finished with my counterattack. I've also documented selective enforcement patterns that potentially constitute housing discrimination under federal law. Would you like me to detail which specific families have been targeted for violations that remain unaddressed at demographically different properties? 2 board members were frantically texting, probably their lawyers, while the air conditioning hummed with mechanical indifference to the legal carnage unfolding. Then came the nuclear option. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out property records from the county assessor's office, I have questions about whether someone outside HOA jurisdiction has legal authority to levy these fines. Delilah's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. What are you talking about? According to these 1998 property surveys, there's a fascinating discrepancy about your actual residential address. Your house appears to fall outside official HOA boundaries due to an original surveying error. I'd be delighted to request an official county review. The taste of victory was sweeter than Elena's flan as Delilah's face transformed from crimson fury to ash-gray terror in approximately 3 seconds. She'd been so obsessed with terrorizing other families, she'd never verified her own legal standing to do it. This meeting is adjourned, she snapped, gathering papers with hands that shook like autumn leaves. As residents filed out, Mr. Park, the elderly Korean gentleman she'd been harassing, approached me quietly. Thank you for your courage, he whispered. She has been making our lives miserable for many months. Walking to my car through the cool evening air, I felt the satisfaction of a well-executed counterattack. Delilah had chosen to wage bureaucratic warfare against a federal investigator. She was about to discover how that typically ends. Delilah's humiliation at the HOA meeting should have ended things. Any reasonable person would have backed down. But I'd underestimated how desperate she was to maintain control. Her revenge came Wednesday evening at the worst possible moment. Elena had just dragged herself home after a brutal 12-hour NICU shift, still smelling faintly of hospital antiseptic and exhaustion. Sophia and Miguel were sprawled on the carpet doing homework when fire truck sirens shattered our quiet street. 4 firefighters in full gear stormed up our driveway, gas detection equipment beeping frantically. The mechanical whine of sensors mixed with diesel engine roar created an orchestra of manufactured crisis. Everyone out immediately, Captain Rodriguez shouted to Elena, who stood frozen in our doorway wearing scrubs. Anonymous report of dangerous chemical storage and possible hazmat situation. My stomach dropped as neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by emergency vehicles painting our street in flashing red chaos. Elena's face went pale as she realized the implications. Any report involving hazardous materials at her residence could trigger a nursing license investigation. There are no chemicals, she protested, voice cracking with panic. I'm a pediatric nurse. I follow all protocols. Ma'am, we have to investigate all reports, Rodriguez said gently, directing his team into our house while neighbors gathered on sidewalks like it was free entertainment. Through the mechanical symphony, I spotted Delilah's silhouette in her window, phone still pressed to ear, watching our family's dignity get shredded for the second time in 2 weeks. 20 minutes of thorough searching revealed exactly nothing dangerous. No hazardous materials detected, Rodriguez announced loudly enough for gathered neighbors to hear. The supplies in question are standard medical transport items, properly sealed, completely legitimate. Elena's NICU bag contained pediatric medications and equipment she was required to carry between shifts, legal, necessary, and weaponized by someone into fake terrorism. But here came my mini-twist discovery. As trucks prepared to leave, Rodriguez pulled me aside with an expression I recognized from my own investigations, someone connecting dots. This is the second emergency call from this street in 3 weeks, he muttered, glancing toward Delilah's house. Different addresses, same female voice reporting dangerous activity by families who... He paused, choosing words carefully. Let's say the demographics are consistent. My FBI training kicked in. Pattern recognition was fundamental to criminal investigation, and this pattern was screaming systematic harassment. The previous call, I asked casually. Elderly Korean couple 2 blocks over. Anonymous tip about suspicious chemical odors from their home business. Turned out to be kimchi fermentation. Rodriguez's expression showed exactly what he thought of that investigation. Elena overheard and grabbed my arm, her nurse's training recognizing the professional threat. Marcus, if the hospital hears about hazmat reports from my address, they'll suspend me pending investigation. My license, my career, everything. The stakes had just escalated from neighborhood harassment to destroying my wife's livelihood. Elena had spent years building her career, saving children's lives, and some racist neighbor was trying to weaponize bureaucracy to destroy it all. That night, I researched emergency response laws with the focused intensity of a federal prosecutor building a case. False emergency reports weren't just local misdemeanors. When dispatch systems crossed jurisdictional lines, they became federal crimes punishable by substantial prison time. I started documenting everything: dispatch times, response patterns, targeted demographics. While I couldn't get recordings immediately, I could request them through proper channels, though that process would take weeks. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena's colleague called the next morning, voice tight with concern. "Elena, someone contacted our HR department asking about safety protocols for nurses transporting hazardous materials. They didn't identify themselves, but..." My blood ran cold. Delilah wasn't just filing false reports, she was actively trying to sabotage Elena's career through back-channel harassment. "Did you mention this call came from your home address?" the colleague continued. "Because there's going to be a mandatory review." Elena's hands shook as she hung up. 15 years of nursing, countless children saved, an impeccable professional record, all threatened by some neighbor's racist vendetta. That evening, I noticed something interesting while reviewing our neighborhood. The Martinez family had installed new security cameras after their own emergency visit. Mrs. Park was taking photographs of her property line. Even the Johnsons, white family, never targeted, were looking nervous. Delilah's reign of terror was finally affecting people who'd previously ignored her victims. I installed our own professional security system, strategically positioned to document any future harassment. While setting up cameras, I heard our neighbor Bryce coming home from his government job, keys jingling in the evening air. He seemed stressed lately, constantly on his phone, mentioning something about workplace investigations to Delilah. Something about his timing felt connected to our harassment, but I couldn't quite place it yet. Elena found me that night surrounded by legal documents and timeline charts. "What are you planning?" "Protection," I said, showing her federal statutes on emergency service abuse. "She's building a case against herself with every false report." Through our window, Delilah's house glowed with lights where she was probably planning her next move. She had no idea that targeting a federal agent's wife's career was about to escalate this far beyond neighborhood drama. Justice was coming, and it would be federal. Delilah's attack on Elena's nursing career crossed every line between harassment and warfare. But apparently, destroying my wife's livelihood wasn't enough satisfaction for her vindictive soul. The nuclear option arrived on a gorgeous Saturday morning when I was teaching Sophia and Miguel to change a tire in our driveway, one of those perfect father-children moments that suburban dreams are built on. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from our kitchen window while birds chirped in Elena's garden. Then our neighbor, Mrs. Palmer, came running over, her face pale with panic. "Marcus, someone put a for sale sign on your lawn," she gasped, pointing toward our street. "But the information is very strange." My stomach plummeted as I spotted the professional realtor sign planted like a flag of surrender on our perfectly maintained property. Delilah's real estate company logo gleamed in the morning sun, but the details made my vision blur with rage. "Must sell. Family forced to relocate due to safety violations." A laminated attachment listed specifics that read like a police report: recent hazmat emergency responses, ongoing municipal code violations, and escalating neighborhood disturbance patterns requiring immediate relocation. Sophia's small hand gripped mine. "Daddy, why does that sign say we have to move? I like my room." Before I could process the full scope of this violation, my phone exploded with the first call. "Mr. Donnelly? This is Janet from Morrison Realty. Mrs. Hutchinson told us you're desperate to sell due to some unfortunate safety issues. I already have 3 cash buyers interested in your distressed property situation." "We're not selling anything," I said through gritted teeth. But Mrs. Hutchinson provided extensive documentation about emergency service responses and safety violations at your address. She said you needed immediate assistance relocating to a more appropriate neighborhood for your family's circumstances. Here came the mini twist that made my FBI training kick into overdrive. In the next 2 hours, I discovered Delilah hadn't just posted a fake sign. She'd orchestrated a complete real estate fraud scheme. Our homeowner's insurance received anonymous reports about fire hazards. The county assessor got calls about safety concerns requiring emergency property devaluation. Our mortgage company was contacted about our instability as residents, but the devastating masterstroke was the online listing. Elena found it after her morning run, hands shaking as she showed me her phone screen. Our home was featured on 3 major real estate websites with professional photos and a description that painted us as dangerous refugees. Motivated sellers forced to relocate due to escalating safety violations and ongoing municipal enforcement issues. Priced below market for quick sale. 18 hours live, 37 inquiries from vulture investors looking for distressed property deals. She's trying to force us into a panic sale, I realized, my federal white-collar crime experience recognizing the pattern. Her company profits from both ends, creating the crisis and providing the solution. I started building an evidence file with the methodical precision of a federal prosecutor. Screenshots, recorded calls, timeline documentation. What emerged was systematic wire fraud across state lines, each false report a separate felony punishable by up to 20 years federal prison. But while investigating Delilah's scheme, I stumbled onto information that made my pulse race with Hunter's instincts. Her husband Bryce had been unusually stressed lately. I'd noticed him pacing in their driveway during phone calls, mentioning workplace security reviews and background check updates to Delilah. Something about federal job complications. When I cross-referenced their address with public employment records, a connection started forming that made my investigators' intuition scream. Bryce worked for a federal agency, had security clearance requirements, and was married to someone currently committing multiple federal crimes. If his background investigators discovered his wife's criminal activity, his career would implode instantly. Elena found me that evening surrounded by property fraud evidence and federal employment regulations, the papers rustling like dry leaves as I connected dots. She's not just trying to steal our house, I explained, showing her the fraudulent listings. She's committing federal crimes that could send her to prison for decades. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, real estate fraud. Each fake report is a separate felony. But the beautiful irony was just beginning to crystallize. If Bryce worked for the federal government and his wife was committing federal crimes, his security clearance would be revoked immediately upon discovery. Their household income would vanish overnight, making their own property vulnerable to foreclosure. What if her husband's federal job is more connected to us than she realizes? I asked Elena, showing her the employment database searches. Through our window, Delilah's house glowed with lights where she was probably planning her next escalation, completely oblivious that every criminal act was being documented by someone with federal law enforcement connections and the investigative skills to destroy her completely. The taste of approaching justice was intoxicating. Delilah wanted to play real estate warfare with a federal agent's family. She was about to discover that some games have consequences far beyond her imagination. Monday morning at the FBI field office started with the usual ritual: burnt coffee that tasted like motor oil and quarterly personnel evaluations that made me question humanity's future. I opened my computer to review subordinate performance files, expecting another boring morning of bureaucratic drudgery. Then I saw the name that made my blood freeze. Hutchinson, Bryce A., Junior Intelligence Analyst, Security Clearance Review pending. My coffee mug hit the desk with a ceramic crack that echoed through my empty office. The employee photograph stared back at me. Clean-shaven face, nervous smile, cheap government tie. Definitely the quiet guy who scurried out of the corner house every morning like a federal mouse. My racist neighbor's husband, working directly under my supervision for 6 months. The irony slammed into me like a freight train loaded with cosmic justice. For 3 weeks I'd been documenting his wife's federal crimes while he sat in my morning briefings, completely oblivious that his boss was building a prosecution case against his spouse. I pulled Bryce's complete personnel file with hands that actually trembled, partly from shock, partly from anticipation of the devastation I was about to unleash. What I found was a slow-motion career suicide. Recent performance reviews painted a picture of declining professionalism, demonstrates problematic attitudes during diversity training, made inappropriate comments regarding immigrant workforce integration, requires intensive coaching on professional communication standards. But the nuclear bomb was buried in his security clearance documentation. Federal employees must report any significant changes involving immediate family legal issues. Bryce's last update was 6 months ago, before Delilah's harassment campaign began. He'd systematically failed to disclose his wife's false police reports, federal crimes, and ongoing legal violations. Career-ending security breach, immediate clearance revocation, termination for cause. The smell of stale office air mixed with my growing excitement as I cross-referenced timelines. Every single one of Delilah's false emergency reports coincided with days Bryce had accessed neighborhood patrol databases through federal systems. He'd been feeding restricted law enforcement information to his wife for more effective harassment targeting. Computer fraud, abuse of federal resources, violation of sworn oath. Each offense carrying 5 to 15 years federal prison time. I leaned back in my government-issued chair, savoring the beautiful precision of their self-destruction. They'd been committing federal crimes against a federal supervisor while documenting their own evidence trail through federal databases. The laughter that escaped my throat sounded slightly unhinged, even to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Delilah just drove by our house 3 times this morning, taking pictures. Something's coming. Perfect timing. Bryce had mandatory ethics training this Friday. Delicious irony that made my investigator's soul sing, which meant maximum stress and distraction all week. The ideal setup for Delilah's most spectacular mistake yet. I started planning with the methodical precision of someone about to orchestrate beautiful justice. Community barbecue this weekend. Maximum neighbors, maximum witnesses, maximum media coverage when everything exploded. Every previous harassment victim needed to see what happened when you target the wrong family. Every future would-be suburban terrorist needed to understand the consequences of weaponizing authority against innocent people. The taste of approaching victory was sweeter than Elena's tres leches cake. I opened my calendar and began crafting invitations for the most satisfying community gathering in suburban history. Delilah had spent weeks trying to destroy my family using fake authority and manufactured crises. Now she was about to meet someone who possessed real authority and the federal power to make her worst nightmares come true. The hunter had identified his prey, studied her patterns, and was ready to spring the perfect trap. Justice was coming to Clearwater Heights, and it would be absolutely beautiful. The next morning, I sat in my home office surrounded by the tools of systematic justice, federal regulations, neighborhood contact lists, and a coffee cup that tasted like anticipation mixed with Colombian beans. My first call went to Kim and James Park, the elderly Korean couple who'd been living under Delilah's harassment for months. The phone crackled with Mrs. Park's cautious voice, someone who'd learned to expect bad news from unexpected calls. "Mrs. Park, this is Roman Donnelly from Maple Street. I think it's time we discussed our mutual neighbor situation." 20 minutes later, I had confirmation of Delilah's systematic targeting. The Parks had endured false complaints about their illegal home business, kimchi fermentation that apparently threatened suburban property values. They'd almost sold until Mr. Park's lawyer grandson advised documenting everything instead of running. My second call reached Destiny Williams, whose voice carried the bone-deep exhaustion of someone fighting a war she never chose. Her story was painfully familiar. Constant police calls whenever her children played outside, HOA violations for identical activities that white families enjoyed freely, insurance inquiries about their property maintenance. "My husband wants to move," Destiny confessed. "But why should we run from some racist neighbor? We love this house." "You shouldn't run," I said firmly. "And after this weekend, you won't have to." I spent Tuesday researching HOA law with the obsessive focus that had made me successful in federal investigations. What I discovered would have made any municipal attorney weep with joy. During my years prosecuting white-collar crime, I'd learned that homeowners associations must follow state corporation laws, something most suburban dictators conveniently ignore. Delilah's emergency meetings violated mandatory 72-hour notice requirements. Every fine she'd issued was procedurally invalid and legally unenforceable. The smell of Elena's morning coffee mixed with the satisfaction of finding legal ammunition as I documented each procedural violation. Emergency meetings could only address genuine emergencies. Personal vendettas didn't qualify under any reasonable interpretation of governing documents. But technical victories weren't enough. I wanted community healing through public accountability. My masterstroke came Wednesday when I hired the same professional surveyor who'd assessed our original property. His findings would be nuclear. Delilah's prized Japanese garden extended 3 feet onto city easement land, making $15,000 in landscaping improvements technically theft of public property. Municipal authorities had legal right to remove unauthorized improvements without compensation, plus levy substantial fines for illegal land use. The irony of someone obsessed with property violations committing the biggest property violation in neighborhood history was absolutely delicious. Thursday morning brought invitation writing with the enthusiasm of planning the world's most satisfying block party. Community Unity Barbecue, celebrating neighborhood diversity and mutual support, sounded perfectly innocent while setting up Delilah's most spectacular public humiliation. The guest list was strategic perfection. Fire Captain Rodriguez, still irritated about false emergency calls. Police Sergeant Martinez from Community Relations. Local reporter Sarah Palmer, who loved positive neighborhood stories. And my secret weapon, FBI agent Patricia Vega from Community Outreach, eager to represent federal law enforcement at a positive community event. Delilah would be confronting my family in front of active law enforcement, media coverage, and maximum neighborhood witnesses. The chess pieces were aligning beautifully. Elena emerged from this kitchen carrying fresh coffee that smelled like victory and determination. How many people are coming to watch this woman destroy herself? 43 confirmed, I said, checking off names, including every family she's harassed, plus neighbors who've been silent witnesses to her racism. Friday afternoon setup required military precision. I positioned what I privately called evidence stations around our backyard. Documentation tables with HOA bylaws, property surveys, harassment timelines, copies of every false report. Everything organized like federal prosecution exhibits. The sound system needed perfect calibration. Every word of Delilah's inevitable meltdown had to be recorded for legal and historical purposes. I tested microphones while Elena prepped traditional Puerto Rican dishes that would transform our backyard into an aromatic celebration of exactly what Delilah couldn't tolerate. The taste of approaching justice mixed with the smell of Elena's sofrito as I made final preparations. Years of federal investigations had taught me that the most satisfying takedowns combined legal precision with public consequences. As evening approached, I watched Bryce leave for mandatory ethics training at the FBI office, completely oblivious that his supervisor had spent the week orchestrating his wife's complete destruction. The cosmic irony was so perfect it almost seemed divinely ordained. Everything was ready. Community united, evidence compiled, media positioned, law enforcement present. The trap was loaded with legal ammunition, baited with the multicultural celebration that would trigger Delilah's racist compulsions. All that remained was watching her walk straight into the most beautiful, devastating public destruction in suburban history. The hunter was ready. The prey was predictable. Justice was about to be served with a side of perfectly seasoned pernil. Friday night brought Delilah's most desperate and criminally stupid escalation yet. I was reviewing final preparations for Saturday's community barbecue when motion sensors triggered around our property. Through security cameras, I watched Delilah creeping across our front yard at midnight, like some suburban commando clutching a flashlight and gardening tools. She was tampering with the professional survey stakes marking our property boundaries. Night vision footage captured everything in criminal clarity. Delilah systematically moving metal stakes 3 feet toward our property line, desperately trying to hide evidence of her garden's encroachment on city land. Each moved stake represented felony tampering with official survey equipment, a federal crime when obstructing government investigations. The metallic scraping of stakes being pulled from hard earth mixed with her muttered curses as she worked to cover her tracks. But midnight property crimes were just her opening move. Saturday morning arrived with Elena humming while she prepared pernil that filled our kitchen with garlic, oregano, and cultural pride. The smell of community celebration mixed with my anticipation of justice as early guests began arriving for setup. Then Delilah detonated her nuclear weapon. At 9 a.m. sharp, 3 hours before our barbecue, 2 Child Protective Services investigators appeared at our door with grim expressions and official clipboards that made my blood freeze. Mr. and Mrs. Donnelly? The lead investigator, a tired woman named Patricia, displayed her credentials. We received a serious report about unsafe living conditions for minor children at this address. Elena's coffee mug exploded against our kitchen floor, ceramic shards scattering like her composure. The smell of spilled coffee mixed with her sudden terror as she realized someone was weaponizing child welfare services against our family. What specific allegations? I asked, federal training keeping my voice steady while rage built like a nuclear reactor approaching meltdown. Anonymous report citing dangerous chemical storage, inadequate parental supervision, and inappropriate exposure to, quote, foreign cultural influences potentially harmful to American children's psychological development. The racist implications hit Elena like physical violence. 15 years saving children's lives as a pediatric nurse, and some vindictive neighbor was painting her as an unfit mother because of her Puerto Rican heritage. Sophia and Miguel appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with confusion and fear. 3 government intrusions in 4 weeks was psychological terrorism designed to break children's sense of home security, exactly the pattern I'd seen in systematic family harassment cases. The 40-minute inspection felt like armed invasion. Investigators photographed our refrigerator contents, examined bedroom conditions, interviewed our confused children, and documented Elena's medical supplies with criminal investigation thoroughness. Meanwhile, through our kitchen window, I watched our community gathering disintegrate in real time. Early arrivals saw CPS vehicles and assumed the worst. Mrs. Park looked stricken. Destiny Williams drove away without stopping. Even Fire Captain Rodriguez hesitated before approaching a house under child welfare investigation. Delilah's timing was surgically precise and devastatingly effective. When investigators finally left, finding zero evidence of neglect, our barbecue lay in ruins. Neighbors whispered in uncomfortable clusters while Elena fled to our bedroom, sobbing with exhaustion and humiliation. But then came the mini twist that transformed my rage into cold, predatory calculation. Bryce arrived home from FBI ethics training just as CPS cars departed. Instead of surprise at the commotion, he immediately joined Delilah for hushed conversation that my cameras captured perfectly. His body language screamed foreknowledge. He'd known about the false report. Later timeline analysis revealed the devastating truth. CPS received their anonymous tip Thursday afternoon, precisely when Bryce was at FBI headquarters accessing federal databases. He'd researched our family's vulnerability to child endangerment allegations, then fed that intelligence to Delilah for maximum psychological destruction. Federal employee weaponizing child protective services against his supervisor's family constituted multiple felonies: database abuse, conspiracy, false reporting, criminal harassment under color of authority. By afternoon, our backyard sat eerily quiet. Folding tables stood empty, decorations hung like abandoned dreams. Elena remained locked in our bedroom, too devastated to face neighbors who'd witnessed her humiliation. "She destroyed everything," Elena whispered when I finally coaxed her out. "Our reputation, the children's sense of safety, the community trust we've been building." But as evening approached, something remarkable happened. One by one, neighbors began returning, not for a party, but for solidarity. The Parks brought kimchi and quiet support. Destiny Williams arrived with her children and fierce determination. Fire Captain Rodriguez stopped by in civilian clothes with his family. "That woman went too far," Mrs. Palmer said simply, helping Elena salvage food preparation. "Attacking children crosses every line." The community was rallying, but the damage was real. Sophia asked why bad people kept coming to our house. Miguel wouldn't play in our front yard anymore. Delilah had escalated to family terrorism, and the consequences would be absolute. I spent Saturday night reviewing federal conspiracy statutes and civil rights violations. Every crime would be prosecuted with maximum penalties. But more than legal punishment, I wanted public destruction that would serve as permanent warning to suburban terrorists everywhere. Tomorrow's confrontation would deliver justice so complete, so devastating, that Delilah's name would become synonymous with the price of racist harassment. The reckoning was coming, and it would be merciless. Sunday morning felt like the calm before a hurricane, deceptively peaceful while electrical tension charged the air thick enough to taste. Elena moved through our kitchen with the mechanical precision of someone processing trauma, preparing food for a community gathering that felt more like preparing for war. The smell of sofrito sizzling in olive oil mixed with my anticipation as I made final adjustments to our sound system and evidence stations. "Are you sure this is the right move?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd spent Saturday night comforting frightened children. "What if she finds some way to hurt us worse?" "She's already done her worst," I said, testing microphone levels that would capture every word of the coming confrontation. Child Protective Services was her nuclear option. Now she has nothing left except desperation. By 11 a.m., our backyard was transforming into something that would have made any community organizer weep with pride. Folding tables groaned under dishes representing 6 different cultures. Kids ran between inflatable obstacles while parents shared stories of harassment survival. The sound of genuine laughter mixed with Spanish, Korean, and English conversations created exactly the multicultural celebration that Delilah couldn't tolerate. But the most satisfying element was our law enforcement presence. Fire Captain Rodriguez mingled with his family, still annoyed about false emergency calls. Sergeant Martinez from Police Community Relations chatted with neighbors about crime prevention. And my secret weapon, FBI agent Patricia Vega, documented everything for the Bureau's community outreach files, completely unaware she was about to witness the most spectacular suburban takedown in federal history. Local news reporter Sarah Palmer had arrived early, setting up equipment for what she believed was a heartwarming neighborhood unity story. Her camera crew positioned for maximum coverage of our diversity celebration, having no idea they were about to broadcast the most devastating public humiliation in suburban history. At exactly noon, peak party time, Delilah made her entrance. She stormed across our property line like an angry blonde general leading a suburban assault, flanked by 2 other HOA board members who looked increasingly uncomfortable as they approached our clearly legitimate gathering. Her face was flushed with rage that made her bottle blonde hair look even more artificial under the afternoon sun. "This ends right now," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, waving a thick folder of papers like a weapon. "I have documentation of multiple violations, noise ordinances, and health code infractions that require immediate shutdown." The sound of children's laughter died as parents instinctively gathered their kids closer. Sarah Palmer's camera swiveled toward the confrontation while her reporter instincts kicked into overdrive. This wasn't the heartwarming story she'd expected, but it was definitely newsworthy. "Ma'am, could you identify your authority to shut down this gathering?" I asked with the calm professionalism that came from 15 years of federal investigations. "I'm Delilah Hutchinson, HOA board member and licensed real estate professional," she declared, chest puffed with self-importance. "These people are violating multiple community standards and probably don't even belong in this neighborhood." Her pointed look at Elena and the Korean families made the racism crystal clear for every witness and camera present. Fire Captain Rodriguez stepped forward with the authority of someone who dealt with enough false reports. "Ma'am, all permits for this gathering are valid. What specific violations are you alleging?" Delilah's confidence flickered as she realized she was facing actual law enforcement instead of intimidated neighbors. But her desperate need for control overrode any survival instinct. "These people have been reported for chemical storage violations, child endangerment, and inappropriate cultural activities that threaten community standards," she announced, voice rising with hysteria. "I have documentation proving they don't belong here." That's when Bryce arrived at the worst possible moment. He appeared in our backyard looking like a man walking to his own execution, still wearing his FBI lanyard from weekend office work. The same lanyard that identified him as a federal employee to every law enforcement officer present. The recognition dawned slowly across Agent Vega's face as she connected the dots. FBI employee married to woman making racist accusations at federal agent's family gathering. The professional implications were immediate and career-ending. "Delilah, we need to leave now," Bryce whispered desperately, trying to pull his wife away from the gathering storm. But Delilah was beyond reason, drunk on months of harassment success and unable to process that her targets weren't running anymore. "No," she screamed, pulling away from Bryce's grip. "I'm not letting these people destroy our neighborhood values. Someone needs to enforce standards around here." She pointed directly at Elena with unmistakable venom. "These people probably aren't even legal residents. Someone should check their immigration status." The camera captured everything. 43 witnesses heard every word. 3 law enforcement officers documented every racist statement. Delilah had just committed federal civil rights violations in front of FBI surveillance while her federal employee husband stood helplessly watching his career implode in real time. The stage was perfectly set for the complete destruction I'd been planning for weeks. Time to reveal who she'd really been attacking. The moment of perfect justice had arrived, and I was going to savor every devastating second. "Ma'am," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority that had made me successful in federal investigations, "I think there's something very important you should know." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the leather credential case that had terrified criminals and impressed prosecutors for 15 years. The gold FBI badge caught afternoon sunlight like divine intervention as I held it high enough for every camera, witness, and law enforcement officer to see clearly. "I'm Supervisory Special Agent Roman Donnelly, Federal Bureau of Investigation," I announced, my voice projecting across our backyard with the precision of someone trained in courtroom testimony. "And I supervise your husband's security clearance review." The color drained from Delilah's face like someone had opened a valve, transforming her from flushed angry to corpse pale in approximately 3 seconds. Bryce made a strangled noise that sounded like his soul leaving his body, but I wasn't finished destroying them. "For the past month, I've been documenting a systematic harassment campaign against my family involving multiple federal crimes," I continued, pulling out the tablet containing weeks of evidence. "False emergency reports, insurance fraud, computer database abuse, and civil rights violations." Agent Vega stepped forward with the focused intensity of a federal prosecutor recognizing career-making evidence. "Agent Donnelly, are you alleging that a federal employee participated in civil rights violations?" Agent Hutchinson accessed restricted law enforcement databases to provide information for his wife's harassment campaign, I said, showing the timeline correlation between Bryce's database queries and Delilah's escalating attacks. "He violated computer fraud statutes, abused federal resources, and failed to report spouse's criminal activity as required for security clearance maintenance." The sound of Sarah Palmer's camera crew adjusting equipment mixed with collective gasps from neighbors as the full scope of federal law enforcement corruption unfolded before their eyes. Sergeant Martinez pulled out his notepad with the grim expression of someone documenting career-ending misconduct. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you're under arrest for filing false emergency reports, harassment, and civil rights violations." "This is entrapment!" Delilah screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You can't do this to us. We have rights." "You had rights," I said with the satisfaction of someone watching justice served perfectly. "You forfeited them when you weaponized law enforcement against innocent families based on race and ethnicity." Fire Captain Rodriguez addressed the gathered crowd with professional authority. "Filing false emergency reports wastes taxpayer resources and endangers real victims. This case will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law." But the most devastating moment came when I revealed the evidence that would destroy them completely. "The property violations you've been citing," I said, pulling out official survey documents. "Your garden is built 3 feet onto city property, $15,000 in improvements on land you don't own, without permits, in violation of municipal codes you've been so eager to enforce against others." The Korean elderly gentleman who'd suffered months of harassment stepped forward with quiet dignity. "She told us we were destroying property values, but she was stealing public land." Destiny Williams joined him, her voice carrying the strength of someone who'd survived systematic intimidation. "She called child services on both our families, made our children afraid to play in their own yards." Elena emerged from our house carrying documents with the fierce determination of someone whose motherhood had been attacked. "She tried to destroy my nursing career with false hazmat reports, 15 years saving children's lives, and she tried to paint me as a danger to my own kids." The camera captured every testimony, every piece of evidence, every moment of community solidarity against suburban terrorism. Agent Vega formally took custody of Bryce, whose federal career had just ended in the most public, humiliating way possible. "Agent Hutchinson, you're suspended pending internal investigation for database abuse, conspiracy, and violation of your sworn oath." As news vans arrived and social media exploded with footage of the most spectacular HOA takedown in internet history, I felt the pure satisfaction of perfect justice delivered with surgical precision. "This is what happens," I announced to the cameras and gathered community, "when you weaponize authority against innocent families. Every false police call puts real emergencies at risk. Every racist harassment campaign strengthens our community's resolve against hatred." The taste of victory was sweeter than Elena's tres leches cake as Delilah was loaded into a police vehicle while neighbors applauded spontaneously. But the most satisfying moment came when Sophia and Miguel emerged from our house, no longer afraid of their own backyard, finally safe to play without fear of manufactured emergencies. Justice wasn't revenge. It was protecting everyone's right to peaceful homes and community belonging. The war was over, and decency had won completely. 6 months later, justice had been served with the thoroughness that only federal prosecution could deliver. Bryce pled guilty to computer fraud and conspiracy charges, earning 3 years in federal prison plus permanent loss of security clearance and government employment. His pension vanished, benefits evaporated, and his federal law enforcement career ended in disgrace that would follow him for life. Delilah's fate was even more satisfying. Convicted on 8 federal charges, including civil rights violations, conspiracy, and filing false reports, she received 5 years in federal prison plus $200,000 in fines and victim compensation. Her real estate license was permanently revoked after investigators discovered she'd used similar harassment tactics in 3 previous states to force minority families into panic sales. The house that had been the epicenter of suburban terrorism sat empty for months before foreclosure. Elena and I purchased it at auction for 60% below market value. Poetic justice that made my accountant weep with joy. Elena's parents moved in from Puerto Rico, transforming the former harassment headquarters into a multi-generational celebration of exactly what Delilah had tried to destroy. Our neighborhood underwent a complete transformation that felt like emerging from a toxic fog into clean air. The new HOA board, elected on a platform of diversity and fairness, voided every discriminatory fine Delilah had issued and refunded money to harassment victims. We established the Hutchinson Rule, requiring all board members to actually live within HOA boundaries, plus mandatory bias training for anyone seeking community leadership positions. The annual Unity Barbecue became a neighborhood tradition that drew families from across the metro area. Local news returned every year to document our community success story, though they always focused on healing rather than the spectacular destruction that made it necessary. Elena's triumph was particularly sweet. Promoted to head pediatric nurse after her colleagues saw news coverage of her strength under attack, she established the Delilah Hutchinson Memorial Scholarship, ironically named to support nursing students from underserved communities. The first recipient was a young Latina woman from our exact neighborhood, carrying forward Elena's legacy of turning hatred into healing. My own career benefited from handling the case with federal precision and community sensitivity. Promotion to Assistant Special Agent in Charge came with responsibility for the Bureau's Community Relations Training Program, where I now teach agents to recognize civil rights violations hiding in suburban settings. The Hutchinson case became required study material for federal law enforcement nationwide, but the most meaningful changes were personal and community level. Property values actually increased after the harassment ended, creating a waiting list for houses in what realtors marketed as that diverse, friendly neighborhood where federal agents ensure community safety. The Parks expanded their small business, sharing Korean culture through cooking classes in their harassment-free home. Destiny Williams started a neighborhood watch program that focused on community support rather than suspicious surveillance. Sophia and Miguel, now 9 years old, tell friends that Daddy protects people from bullies with the confidence of children who've seen justice work perfectly. Elena's miscarriage trauma healed through creating the welcoming space for all families that Delilah had tried to prevent. Our former harassment victims became closest family friends, united by survival and mutual support that transcends any surface differences. The Peaceful Neighborhoods Foundation that Elena and I established provides free legal assistance to families facing housing discrimination across 3 states. Annual festivals raise funds for harassment victims' legal defense while celebrating the community diversity that suburban terrorists can't destroy. Partnership with federal civil rights divisions ensures swift prosecution of systematic intimidation campaigns before they escalate to family destruction. Every neighborhood has potential Delilahs, people whose racism and need for control override basic human decency. But our story proves that documentation, community solidarity, and proper legal channels can deliver justice that protects everyone while healing damaged communities.
So Marcus got his justice. Delilah thought she could terrorize a federal agent's family with racist harassment and fake emergency calls. Instead, she got herself 5 years in federal prison and destroyed her husband's FBI career. But here's what gets me about this story. Marcus didn't win because he was an FBI agent. He won because he documented everything and let Delilah destroy herself with her own crimes. Every accusation became federal felony. Every racist HOA violation became evidence for prosecution. The real power wasn't his badge, it was patience, documentation, and understanding how systems work. While Delia was playing HOA tyrant, Marcus built a solid federal case that obliterated her completely. Most of us aren't federal agents, but we all face HOA dictators and petty tyrants. Marcus shows the footprint, document everything, know your rights, and let them hang themselves with their own illegal behavior. What's the worst abuse of small-town authority you've witnessed? HOA harassment? Workplace discrimination? If this justice story hits your satisfaction center, smash the subscribe button for more HOA takedowns. Drop your neighborhood nightmare in the comments. You are not alone in fighting suburban terrorism. Remember, the best revenge is building the community they tried to destroy.